All right, STLC, right? This is what we were talking about last week. STLC is software testing lifecycle. This is our activity. Basically, this is our job. And there are different phases of STLC. Last week, we covered first phase, which is analysis of the requirement. A requirement would be given to you either in a document or it could be written or created in a application or a tool, right? So this is something very first thing given to you, and that's your first job, basically, first part of the job. And once the requirement is given to you, you need to pay attention to that document and understand it and ask questions, take notes, ask questions, and make sure it's clear. That's what you need to do. And make sure it's clear, make sure it is testable, make sure it's not ambiguous, make sure it's consistent, all of this. Make sure there is no gap in the requirement. Once that is done, right, this is your very, very first phase. We talked about it last week, right? Then you're gonna go and start planning your testing. So you're gonna go ahead and create a document called test plan. Just like everything else in life, needs planning, your testing also needs planning. So you're gonna go and start your test plan. So test plan is nothing but a detailed document which explains how the entire testing will be done. Again, the definition of test plan is a detailed document which explains how the entire testing will be done. Now, this is where I'm gonna stop and start explaining test plan. Again, we are explaining STLC. STLC has different phases. Each phases we have to perform. This is us, our job. No one is going to help us other than QA. Everything is QA's job. So we need to understand this thoroughly. We need to be able to do it, and we will practice it here so that you understand these activities thoroughly. If you don't understand this, you don't have a job. Even if you have a job, you can't do the job because you're not good enough, basically. So,
Do we have example pictures of each of these boxes?
yes, brother, hang on. We're getting there slowly. Just like I gave you example of requirement, didn't I? Last week, I showed you guys the requirement, different type of requirement. I showed you the documents and everything. I'll do the same for everything else. Not just showing you, we will also practice all of this. But we have to, this is step by process, right? We have to wait. So yeah, test plan. Let's look at the test plan. Before we look at a test plan, let's understand it a little bit more, right? So I'm going to explain different, I'll take you inside the test plan, basically. All right, so definition of all of these phases are here. Just like I was saying, what is a test plan? It explains here, and then we'll go into the test plan. Okay, so for test plan, a typical test plan usually has a cover page, table of contents, and introduction, purpose, scope, testing approach, test entry criteria, test exit criteria, test acceptance criteria, test deliverables, test schedule, roles and responsibilities, test environment, acronyms, risk assessments, etc. So a typical test plan, it doesn't mean a test plan must have all of this, but a typical standard test plan should have all of this. Each company is different. They could create their own test plan the way they want it, but typically you should have those. You must have the cover page and introduction, purpose, scope, approach, entry and exit criteria, acceptance criteria, deliverables, and whatnot. So this is a standard test plan, and if you can, explain this in the interview, you're good to go. Now, within each of the component of test plan, what it is, we have notes of it, and you should have access to this document. You can go through it and read it and understand it, and I'll show you a physical test plan. So everybody knows cover, these are very basic stuff, right? Cover page, first three, right? Until introduction, these are very, very common. Every document has it. Then purpose, right? If you test purpose, this explain why we need this document, right? This is a section in your actual document. It will explain why we need this one. Scope, this is important. Scope has two part of it, in scope and out of scope. So in testing, we have we need to define our testing scope, the things we're going to test and the things we're not going to test. So this is what it talks about in the test plan. Understand, when you create a test plan, it will be shared with everyone in the project, not just in your team. Of course, you guys, QAs, us, will be creating it, but it will be shared with everyone, developers, business analysts, managers, client. So everybody will go through it and see your test plan and how you're going to do testing, and what are the things you will test, what are the things you will not test, what are the risk assessments and timeline, all of these things. What are the technology or tools you'll be using? Everything will be defined here. What are the approach you'll be taking? So we must define everything here. And one of the most important thing is test scope, right? What are the things we're going to include and what are the things we're going to exclude? So usually there are different type of testing. Right now, it would not make sense to talk about because you would understand. When we need to understand, we'll talk about it. But just understand for the time being, there are items we have we will be including, and there are the testing item that we'll be excluding. So that's all you need to know for now. Of course, test schedule, right? Test schedule is something we need to define, and approach. Next thing is approach. What will be our approach? How will perform our testing, right? And once all of this defined, now we need to talk about entry criteria. How do we enter into our testing? It's, I think I mentioned it a couple of times. This is a process-oriented job, right? It's not something you just do randomly. Everything is predefined and process-oriented and step-by-step process. So you cannot skip a step to go to the next step. You need to complete step one to go to step two, right? So now entry criteria, one may think like, what's there to worry about? Let's just go and test. No, actually, it's not like that, right? So what is test entry criteria? Test entry criteria is the things you need before you enter your testing. And what do you need before you start testing? You need the requirement document. Remember, requirement document is pretty much what everything is driven from. That's where everything is driven from. So you need that document. You need the test plan, which is the exact document we are talking about. You need test cases. That's a different type of document that we'll be talking about in next class. Then you need required access. So when you want to test an application, you need access to that application, right? So that we need test data. Some cases you would need set of data to perform testing with, so that those you need. Of course, you need testing team. Your team needs to be there before you start your testing, right? And of course, application should be ready. So the physical application that you're going to be testing, that needs to be developed by developers and ready and available for testing. That should be there. Unit and integration testing should be done. So these are two type of testing done by the developers. So this should be done. I don't want to get into details of this two testing right now because it wouldn't make sense. But when appropriate, we'll talk about it. So this is a checklist basically. Before you enter testing, that needs to be understood thoroughly and explained in your interview. This is a famous question in interview. What is test entry criteria? And that's something you should understand. Of course, in one go you won't understand. It will take some time and practice. So just like we talked about test entry criteria, we also need to talk about test exit criteria. How do you exit out of testing? You alone do not decide that, okay, I'm done testing, I'm going to exit out. There are checklists that you need to go through and complete before you exit out of testing. So what are the checklists? Let's see. So once testing is done, you need to make sure that test exit criteria is met. And what is test exit criteria? One of them is deadline, right? Let's say you have a deadline. Every project has deadline, so we'll have deadlines too. Once we hit the deadline, of course, we need to exit out of testing. But even before that, even if we meet the deadline and we are not we have not done all of this, then I think we have a problem. We need to let the management know, hey, yes, we met the deadline, but the testing is not complete. So that's when, an extension is required, but you cannot ask for that extension on the last day. That's something needs to be highlighted way before so that appropriate action can be done to get an extension. Getting an extension is a rare case. That's not a common thing. Usually when a deadline is defined, we need to meet that. That's very, very important. So before we exit out of testing, we need to make sure all the requirements and functionalities are covered by our testing. Another thing we need to ensure is all test cases are executed and passed. And then also we need to make sure that all bugs are fixed and closed. And especially no high priority or severity or critical bugs are left open, meaning the application should not have major broken functionality. So when we look at application, we assume that that application should work because right now, we are just using an application as an user. Being user is one thing, being tester is a different thing. So if we look at Facebook, right, our assumption, we're the users and the users. So our assumption, this should work, right? We never imagined that there could be an issue in that application. But in reality, Facebook alone not may, had at least thousands of issues. I cannot tell you exact number, but you're looking at tens of thousands of issues. And those issues were discovered by their team, their quality assurance team, their developers, right? Those were found and fixed. Then that application was sent to us, right? So once we get an actual job, we need to come out of this mindset that, this application was built and is working. Our mindset should be, this application is buggy, it doesn't work, and we need to find those bugs. And typically in an application, you'll find hundreds of bugs, depending on the size of that application, right? If we're talking about Facebook, me sitting here, I would think at least it has 10,000 bugs, if not more, right? Those bugs were logged, fixed, retested, and then close, right? So all bugs are fixed and closed, no high priority or severity bugs. So when you find the bugs, not all of them has same priority. Some bugs will be very, very dangerous, very, very urgent. So those needs to be fixed right away. So for example, you have Facebook, right? And you can log in. That's a high priority bug. That's a blocker, and that needs to be fixed right away, ASAP. If you can't log in, you can't access, right? You can't do anything. So then there could be another situation. You have a login page, you are able to log in and everything, and there is a spelling error. It could be in the homepage or any other page. So that is a bug, but it does not have the same priority because functionally your application works, but there's a misspell there. which looks bad and not presentable, but it works, right? So you can log that bug, but developers will be like, yeah, thank you, but once I have some time, I'll look into it. That could be, in a week, in a month, or in a year, depending on the priority. They may have other better things to work on, so they may not look at it. So just because you logged a bug, it doesn't have the same priority, or doesn't have the same turnaround time. It all depends on the functionality and the criticality of it. So these are your exit criterias, right? And that needs to be followed when you're testing. Now, test acceptance criteria. The other thing goes into your test plan is test acceptance criteria. So test acceptance criteria would be defined by the team, or mainly by your business analyst, right? By you can speak to your business analyst or your client, like, hey, what is acceptable? Now, once you have an application, right, you will find, like I said, Facebook, by sitting here, I can say that had 10,000 bugs, right? So you can log 10,000 bugs, but does it mean the developers will fix all 10,000 bugs at once, or in the same timeline, or a set window? The answer is no. They'll look into top priority bugs and they'll fix those high priority bugs. The low priority bugs, they'll always push out. They'll always say, yeah, we'll look into it. We have other priority work to complete, and they would try to delay it. Now, in that case, right, what is acceptable? And the acceptables is usually the low priority bugs, right? Your application may be in production and the user is accessing it, but that will have some bugs. And now you need to define that what is acceptable, and that has to come from your business stakeholders. And they can say, yeah, you have tested, you have logged 10,000 bugs. We have the team has fixed 9,000, and 1,000 is remaining, and that 1,000 is all low priority bug, and we are fine with that. And if that business says, okay, this is fine, we're fine with low priority bugs, leave them in the application, we will fix them in the future. So that is something they're accepting, and it is acceptable, and that also will be defined in your application. So usually this number is usually low, okay, 10, 15, 20, depending on the size of your application. Every single application has bugs, every single application. It's just low in the priority. And you and I, when we use an application, we don't need to go that far, and we don't really pay attention to those bugs, and we don't really care. And those bugs there because their team decided is acceptable. It's not a major thing, so it's fine. So that's something also needs to be defined here. Now, then in your test plan, you need to define the risk. What are the risks involved, right? So before before you even start testing, you need to say, hey, when we start testing, you cannot do this, this, and that. And one of the major thing is changes of the requirement. Now, you are giving a requirement and you read through the requirement, you did your test planning according to your requirement, your test cases creation, your test data creation, everything. Now, once you're done with that, they can come back and say, hey, we want to change this entirely. Now, what would happen when when they do this? You're behind. You spend a lot of time doing all of this, and not just you, every other team, right? Developers and everybody, designer, everybody. They would do their work, and now client or business analyst comes to you and say, hey, we are changing it entirely. That's a problem. And now that's something you want to define here. Requirement changes is a huge risk. So that's something you need to define here and explain, hey, changes requirement to at a later point of development is a huge risk. They could change requirement early stage of it, right? When the requirement is given, And usually there will be many requirements, right? I was showing you guys last week. If you're working in Agile, you will have many small requirements. If you're working in Waterfall, you will have one big document. So changes can be done in both. Usually, Waterfall requirement doesn't change. So that's a big disadvantage for the client in when it comes to working in Waterfall. The requirement doesn't change. It's uncommon to change requirement. That doesn't mean requirement doesn't change. It could change, but it's not common. But Agile is developed in a way requirement gets changes very frequently, and that's one of the reason companies are adapting Agile, because end user clients, they like to make changes to their requirement to get the updated functionality. And that is, while that is very good for the end user and the client, but it is often it's very challenging for the team who's building that application, like QA, like dev, and exactly what I explained before, right? You know, you get requirement, you get work done, and then they come back and say, okay, we're changing it. So that's the problem, and you need to highlight that.
Everybody,
But sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry I cut you off. I just had a question on your last point.
Yeah,
Because agile is there's a likelihood that requirements might change. Can I also say that comparing waterfall and agile is slightly more riskier because there's changing requirements?
slightly more riskier. I don't know. No, it's not riskier. It's not riskier because agile it changes requirement to agile environment is common, and that's why they adopted agile. So it's a known thing, and that's something when you do your planning estimation, you need to keep some extra time for those kind of activities as well. Um,
So I guess it's already known if we're going to use the agile methodology that we should expect changing requirements.
you should expect changes to the requirement, but
Okay.
we need to highlight that changing requirement at a later point of development is riskier. So they have given you requirement and you haven't done any work. They can go and change it. It doesn't impact you. But at a later point, when you prioritize this task and everybody started working on it, some development has been done, and now they come back and change it, that's a risk. So they need to know when to change the requirement. And if you're changing the requirement at a later stage, that's a risk because you already spent so much time on it. So that's something you need to highlight, basically. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, so should it be disclosed earlier by the business analyst that the requirements are subject to change?
But that's a known thing in Agile.
Okay. No,
That's a
but
known thing.
generally speaking, like let's say we're not even looking at agile, we're looking at the many other there was waterfall and there was a couple other ones. Like generally speaking,
Mhm.
uh, should they disclose that or you
No,
know?
waterfall, once the requirement is finalized, client goes away, you don't see them anymore. You finish your work and then they come back and see their product. So in waterfall, changes to the requirement is not common, basically.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
not common.
All right, thank you.
But but again, it doesn't mean it never happens. It could happen once in a blue moon, but in Agile, it always happens. It just they need to know like when to make that requirement changes.
Okay.
All right. Team member lack of required skills for testing. I mean, the second bullet point, I would skip it. I would not highlight because that's your team, and you're this is something negatively highlighting your team, and I would not. All right, let's skip the second point. Third one, tight schedule. So schedule, that's an issue in agile environment. The schedule, the timeline is very tight, very aggressive timeline. So that's something needs to be considered when the timeline is given. we don't set timeline when it comes to project timelines, delivery timeline. We don't set those timeline. We set testing timeline, right? So, but our testing timelines comes from um, that project timeline only, right? So if you have given unrealistic timeline, that's a risk, right? You won't be able to complete your task. No one will be able to complete their task. So let's say to build a functionality, a major functionality of application, or build an application, they said, okay, do it in 10 days, but in reality, it takes 15 days. So that's not a realistic timeline, and that's something you need to highlight. I really need to update a couple of bullet points here. So poor management skill, I don't think it makes sense. I think we need to reword it. Poor management skill is not, so miscommunications or poor communication, that's a good one. So in the industry, when you're working, that's one thing everyone faces. That's one difficulty everybody faces. Miscommunication or poor communication. I think more like poor communication. Everyone thinks like, okay, usually when you go to the actual work, everybody has everything in their head, and getting it out of their head is the hardest thing. So let's say business analysts, right? They're writing the requirement. They will write the requirement, but chances are they may not explain everything in the requirement. Now, they have understanding, they know what to do, they know what's going on, but they may not just put it in the paper in a way that everybody understands. Right now, it's your job to ask right questions to get it out of their head. Same thing for developers. Most cases, they understand what they're developing. In most cases, they know what they're doing because they spend so much time with uh, different key members. Let's say project managers, clients, business analysts. They spend so much time, designers. We usually don't spend that much time. So they spend so much time to understand what's going on. Um, and they don't probably require that requirement document as much as we do. So now business analyst has it in their head, developers has it in their head, but you and I do not have it in our head, nor do we have it in a document. Now we're stuck in a situation, right? And that level of communication should be done from the team properly. Like I have a requirement, that requirement needs to be communicated in a way that everybody understands. And that's a challenge. I face it till this day. My current project, when I started 2 years ago, the way they are writing requirement, it was a joke. One line, and that's it. There was no, there was there was not enough details. And I'll give you guys example. And this is something you guys please pay attention and understand. Just because somebody written something or somebody said something somewhere doesn't mean it's complete. Doesn't mean it will make sense. Doesn't mean you can work with it. So here you need to sit straight and start thinking, how do I get this out of this person so that it makes sense to me and I can go and do my job? And that's a challenge everybody faces. Uh, so until you work in the industry a little bit, you probably won't be you'd understand, but you probably won't like, ask the right questions or put enough effort to get those out of their head and do your job. And if you don't do it right, there will be mistakes, there will be errors, there will be gap. I'll show you some examples in my current project when I started, right?
So,
When I
so, so an example would be like he would say, "I want it to work," and then you'd have to respond to him like, "Sorry, you would need to describe in more detail what would you like to work, so then I could know what to start on." Something like that.
That's an example, yes.
Or what about when you're doing like an update or like your first rundown on starting the process, then you have to write like a review or update email to the client like, hello, just reporting in that this is what we found, this is where the product is at right now, and this is what's going on. And then they'll say something like, "Great, can you please make sure that the login stuff works and like the security features are in place?" And then you'll just respond back to them, and you'll be like, "Yes, I was gonna finish that tomorrow with my team," or something like that. That's usually how communication goes.
No, I'm gonna show you a good example here. Give me 1 second. Let it load. So this is a real project. This is on my project. Okay. So let's see if we can find a good example.
Build a custom React provider that retrieves authorization information in the form of policies. Description align with FDS design. Okay. As a developer.
All right, so this could be a good example, guys. All right, so this is a requirement in Agile, right? So if you look at this requirement, right, so they have written it here. So we have the summary. This is the summary, right? FDS slider, this is the summary. Now we have the description, right? In description, they would be explaining user journey. As a developer, I want to be able to, whatever it is they want to do. So that's the user journey. Now there's another concept of acceptance criteria. So acceptance criteria, basically, you would be testing again. So in acceptance criteria, they will be defining what are the things that user should be able to perform, right? And or see, right? So if you see FDS slider, right? In this slider, they're saying these are the things this user should be able to verify. All properties are shown, description, all verify all the descriptions are passed, and so on, right? So these are the three things, right? They're saying as part of this requirement, we should be developing. Now, this is an example of a very, very good requirement. Let me see if there is any screenshot.
Wait, so you don't need him to elaborate on what properties are, what descriptions are?
Hold on, let me go through it. A lot of the guys, a lot of the things, right, it will be explained if you wait a minute. It's good to ask questions, but let's just wait a little bit so
All right.
that we can save time for everybody. Okay, so this is an example of a good requirement, right? Now, if I delete these things, right? What I was explaining to you guys, how miscommunication happens at work. Now, the ones that I highlighted, if I delete this and just have FDS slider, would you be able to understand and do your test planning and do your testing? If I delete the highlighted part of it, would you be able to test this up?
No.
Of course,
No, I don't even know what a slider is. I don't know what FDS is.
of course not, right? So this always happens. They would just give you like one liner here, maybe something here under description, because this is a mandatory field. If they do not enter any value here, they won't be able to create this ticket, right? So they will just, let's say they will just write this summary and write something here, which probably doesn't explain everything, right? In that case, now you need to go in here, right? And dig in and say, hey, FDS slider, okay, I understand. FDS is an application. That application has a slider. Now what do I do here? Right, now you go here and start asking questions. You can say, hey, so let's say if they're using this tool, this is a Jira tool. It's very, very famous. Majority of the companies are using this one. So this has many, many features. You can go here and comment. You see a comment section. You can come here and ask this person, and this person you can see here reported by reporter right here. So this person, you can tag this person here and say, hey, you created this ticket, it's not complete, can you give us more details, right? You have a you have just slider, But what are we doing with this slider? What is the acceptance criteria? So this is important here, right? Acceptance criteria is what is acceptable, right? You're gonna say, hey, define acceptance criteria here so that I can test it, right? This things happens all the time, all the time. Now, I face this too, right? I face this too, but luckily I was mature enough to ask questions and also not only just asking questions, defining that what a requirement should look like. So I pretty much, told everybody, my managers and dev managers and business managers, guys, if you're not giving me acceptance criteria, proper acceptance criteria, clear acceptance criteria, clear description, we will not be testing it. It's not possible. So here's a template. This is how you should write requirement. Of course, you guys don't need to do it because I had the authority to do it. But as long you are getting your information that you're looking for, you're good to go, right? So this is standard, right? A description must be there, an acceptance criteria must be there, and a summary. Summaries must be there. Then only this requirement is complete. On top of it, they should give you a design document. This one, unfortunately, does not have a design document. So a design document can be simply a screenshot that is attached here. Usually they can just attach here. So unfortunately, this one does not have design document, but everything else is very, very nicely done here. Now, ask me any questions you may have.
Okay, I have a question. So, what like I'm confused. There's two things. It's independent contracting jobs, or like you're working for an actual company and this is your regular 40-hour a week gig. So you're doing this project. How do like when does this happen in the beginning, or when you're working for a company? It's always gonna be like this. Like there's a new month project. There's a new quarterly project. Like somebody from that company is gonna message you and say that you need to do a project. How does this even start?
I was hoping a question related to this miscommunication, but you
No,
ask
I
your
understand the
questions.
miscommunication part, but like, how do we even get to that part? Is this the client himself asking in the beginning to start, or is this like,
No, that's a broader question, project level question. Once a project is ready, they will call you and hire you, and that's a process that goes through. A company will call you, will give you a job, and once they give you a job, you go work for them. This has nothing to do with requirement or communication or whatnot.
oh, and then this is the customer, or is this is like the business analyst person telling you this is what we need?
Yeah, so business analyst writes the requirement and developers does the developing and QA does the testing. And
So who who
again,
who would be who would be sending you this ticket of the FDS slider and stuff like that?
so when you work in a project, right? Everything, a project will be created, and within that project, all of your requirement would be there for everybody, not just for you. This is a professional job. No one is gonna babysit you or hand feed, spoon feed you and give you a ticket to work on. Everything is there. Everybody should know what their responsibilities are. If somebody has questions, they will be asking questions. If somebody needs a meeting, they'll be setting up meeting other than daily cadence, right? It's not like, hey, one ticket here, go work on it. That's micromanaging. Unless if you're working for Indian companies, this doesn't happen. This
Okay,
is,
okay, yeah.
yeah.
So now how do you know what you're supposed to be doing? This is like, if
All right,
this is for
brother,
everybody.
hang in there. You can't understand everything in one class. That's why we have 3 to 6 months. Those broader questions will be answered automatically. Let's focus on the topic. This is so that we're not wasting a lot of other people's
Okay,
time.
so miscommunication. All right. So this is an example of a good communication. This ticket right here.
Right.
Okay, could you show us an example of a bad ticket?
What, didn't I do it already? Didn't I say if I
It,
delete this, what happens?
I mean, somebody's gonna send you a blank piece.
Okay. Um, I'm requesting all of you guys, we can go through questions answer all day. Now, what are we doing? Does my question make sense? I have explained earlier that if I delete this highlighted part, I think I mentioned 3 times already, that's a poor communication. Now, 10 minutes later, you're asking the same questions. I try to limit questions so that we are focused. We only have 1 hour for the entire week. If we spend half of this time just asking questions
Okay, brother. I'm
that already
sorry.
has been answered. No,
I'm
no, no.
sorry.
It's
I'm
very, very
sorry.
important that we understand that where we're spending time. I come to this class very, very organized. You will see my class very, very organized. I don't like to waste a single second. So when you ask a question, please understand, is it relevant? Am I wasting everybody's time? And of course, there are 27 people. Everybody should get the chance to ask questions as well. So I'm requesting you. I'm not trying to, you know, demotivate you from speaking, but also we need to consider everybody else's time.
Understood.
Cool. So this is already explained. What is an example of poor communication and what is an example of good communication? Let's move on. Environmental crash. So environmental crash can be a disaster, right? So we have servers. Servers holds the environmental details. Right now, we are moving away from servers to the cloud, and cloud is AWS, Azure DevOps, things like this. So Amazon has AWS and Microsoft has Azure DevOps. These are cloud-based servers. So now let's say 10 years ago or 5 years ago, the concept was everybody must have their own servers, right? And that server's a physical server sitting somewhere. It could be anywhere, right? Now, what happens if disaster hits, right? That environment, that server will be crashed. Now, if you don't have a backup somewhere else, right, then everything gets deleted, right? Now, for that, you know, Amazon is really, really safe. They have their servers all over the world and it's very, very secure. Now nowadays, we don't see environmental crash as much as before because of AWS and things like this. So this bullet point, we don't need to worry about so much when it comes to testing risk. And again, I mentioned before, I need to update a couple of the bullet points here, right? Also the last one, I think wrong estimate, budget is something we don't need to worry about. Wrong estimates, which is estimates meaning the timeline. We talked about timeline before a little bit, right? If let's say an application may take 6 months to complete, but we gave estimate to complete that application in 3 months. So that's a wrong estimate and it's not possible to complete that or meet the deadline for the project. So that's a risk that we need to highlight, and often we see that, right? The timeline is given, but we're not able to meet the timeline. So when we look at the project, we should be able to say, hey, yes, you committed to this deadline, but this is a risk. I think it's going to be very, very tight. So we should have backup. And what is the backup? They would start the communication with the client saying, hey, the timeline could be risk. We need to think about extending it. And if there is a room to extend, they will extend. For test plan. So another thing in the test plan, another thing goes into test plan, test deliverables. So test deliverables are the documentations or the evidence that we need to provide during our testing. So test deliverables, as part of test deliverables, we have test plan, test cases, test script, defect, logs, test report. These are nothing but documentation and we need to provide it during our testing to the broader team, right? So you'll understand this. Right now it might be cloudy, but don't think this is the one time we're going through this document. We'll be going through it a couple of more times. You will be creating this document. I wanted to show you a physical test plan. I'm not able to get there, and we already spent an hour and 5 minutes. All right, testing tool. Now, to perform tests, you can do it manually, or you can you can use some tools. And now everybody uses tools. I was showing you a tool earlier where the requirements were written. We can use similar type of testing tool as well. And those tools are very, very organized. It stores your documents. It stores your testing statuses. It stores your defects and defect statuses and every single activities. So every company uses different tools, but commonly people uses a tool called Jira and Jira X-Ray. And these are the tools we're going to be using in IT solutions. To use the tools, you need so for test case creation, you need a tool. Test bug log, you need a tool, and also for cross-browser testing. So cross-browser testing is, let's say an application is built and that application has to be supported in different browsers. For example, Chrome, Safari, Firefox, even in iOS and different mobile platform. So these are the testing we need to perform, and things like this. Test environment. Then the other thing is test environment is setting up necessary properties or tools. Make sure hardware, software testers. So we talked a little. So test environment, configuring test environment. How are we going to configure test environment? That's something we can define, and also one thing to note, configuring test environment and test entry criteria are very, very similar. So we talked about test entry criteria earlier. Just go over it again. Roles and responsibilities. So in the project, we have different individuals, and their roles and responsibilities needs to be defined in the test plan. If you allow me some time, I'll show you how it's done. Acronyms. Acronyms. So when we are working, right, in the industry, we use a lot of acronyms. So a lot of the acronyms are not, our clients are not familiar with, so we define it in the test plan. So that's pretty much it in terms of definition of a test plan. Now let me show you a test plan. So that would give you some idea about what is a test plan. Okay, let me show you a test plan. Meanwhile, if you have any questions, we can go through it. Let me. Okay, test quality report. Testing process, test plan. Okay, so these are real stuff, guys. This is from my work, and I can easily show you a dummy data, but I decided to show you my actual works. So it's a little bit more meaningful, basically. All right. I'll go faster because we're running late. So my company is Carrier, and you can see this is the cover page. In cover page, we have a name of the document, which is a test plan, the project name. Brother, if you have a question, feel free to ask. If not, I would request everybody to be muted so we don't disturb each other. Okay, so name of the document, then the project name, and then the release version and the document version. So every document will have release version and the document version. The release is tied to the application. The document is tied to the version is tied to the document. So if we make a changes, so this is a very initial, I explained last week about versioning a document, right? So this is a very initial version of the document. So it's 1.0. So if anyone makes changes to this document, they need to change the versioning accordingly. If it's a major change, they will be changing this number. If it's a minor change, they will be changing this number, right? So this is our theme. So that's why I have this image here, but usually test plan doesn't need an image. Document history. So notice each company works differently. I was showing you how a typical test plan, I was explaining how a typical test plan looks like in earlier in the definition. But if you go through this one, you will see we in our company, we didn't care for everything that this document has, right? When I say this document has, I'm talking about this, right? This sections, right? These are typical sections a test plan must have, but that doesn't mean everyone will use that. As long as you have the main part, you should be good to go, right? Of course, this is still the top part. Okay, introduction. Of course, introduction and purpose we must have. And this is something additional project summary. This is something always very, very good to have. Explaining what is this project all about, right? Of course, document purpose. Document purpose is defined here. Why you need a test plan to define how the testing is going to be done and timeline and whatnot. So that's something is here. Right. One other thing, right? When you are creating a test plan, the best part of creating a test plan, you don't need to do it from scratch. You can use, once you have a template, you can use it over and over and over and over again. You just need to copy paste the area where you need to, replace some of the things, right? You'll see when you practice, you can use simply this document, just change to your project accordingly. Test objective is very similar thing. Primary test objective, secondary test objective. We did not have it in our document, so I'm not going to go over it. This is not important. Scope of testing, this is very, very, very important. If you don't define this, your test plan is void. No one would appreciate your test plan. So again, we said what's in scope, right? We were going to define what are the things we're going to test. So I said, okay, I'm going to perform smoke test, sanity test, end-to-end test, and I'm giving definition and source document, environment and responsibilities. You'll understand all of this as we go further into this course. So here I'm saying testing is not one thing, guys. There are so many different type of testing that you can do. So here we are saying these are the different type of testing I will perform, right? And still going. Now here, out of scope, out of scope, I'm saying, okay, I'm not going to perform mobile testing. We are saying it because my project does not requires to be supported by mobile application. So we said, okay, we are defining it here. We're not going to perform this testing later on. Do not come back to me and say, hey, this application does not work in mobile app. So this is already done. We are not testing it. Like I mentioned before, roles and responsibilities. Look at this. Everybody's name and their responsibilities, right? Their roles and their responsibilities, right? What QA lead should do, what QA engineer should do, what a tech lead should do, and all of this is defined here, right? Entry and exit criteria. Like these are the things you need to spend a lot of time in. The ones before, right? Scope, in and out of scope, and entry and exit criteria. So we talked about entry and exit criteria before we spend so much time here, but you can see an example of entry and exit criteria. We are defining here. Nothing but what we talked about before. This one is not, these are the things not important. Test deliverables, I said test deliverables. So here I have given a diagram. This is not important. You can just simply say, okay, we'll give you these 4 or 5 documents during our testing, and that's your test deliverable. Very simple, straightforward. A delivery matrix. What is this? Delivery matrix. Test approach. I ignore delivery metrics. It's more like, you know, it's more like what the you can give like metrics in terms of numbers, how many test cases were created, how many test cases were tested, how many pass, how many fail, how many bug logged, and all of this kind of things can be given here, and that would be much better than this table. Documents. This doesn't make sense. So you can see each company can create their own way of test plan. But once you have one template, that's all. Once you finalize one template, that's all really you need. So here we're talking about testing tool. Like I said before, right? Testing requires testing tool. So here we're saying we're going to use Jira. I always talk about Jira because this is very, very popular. And Jira X-Ray. These are the two things we're going to be using to test. We're also going to use Postman here in IT solutions. JMeter is not important, and Selenium is important, but we'll look into it later. Okay, what else? This is a very, very fancy. This is a very, very fancy test plan document. Trust me, you will not see it anywhere. Here we spend so much time. I'm talking about 2 to 3 months. Not every day. We didn't work on it every day, but we spend some time daily to develop this one. And there was a group of people, I think 4 or 5 individual work on it to build this. This is very, very fancy. You will not see it anywhere. I'll show you more examples. I'll send you a template so you can use them, which is much simpler, right? Yeah, we created so many diagram. Your test plan, you don't even need to create a simple diagram. I'll show you as I'll share a test plan example. Okay. So when I talked about defects and priority and severity earlier, right? Not every bug has same priority or severity, right? So defects, and you can define the severity here, like critical, high, medium, low, and definition of each one of them. By by its name itself, you know what it is, right? If it's a critical, it's something needs to be addressed ASAP. If it's low, it's not so much important, right? We talked about it. Test environment. So this is a place where you will be performing your testing, right? This is an environment where you'll be performing your testing. So environment here in software, right, is nothing but an URL. So if you look at this, this is your environment, basically, right? This is one environment, this is one place, that's where the testing will be done, right? We will talk more about this. So here it says test environment, but in the software development, there are at least 4 different environment. Each group of people has their own environment. Developers has their own environment. QA has our own environment. Then UAT, remember we talked about UAT. UAT folks has their own environment. And of course, production has their own environment where everybody has access to that as well, right? So just understand for now, we have our own place to test, but everything else when it comes to environment, we'll explain later. Then comes, right, different type of testing. These are the testing in scope, and we will be performing those in this environment. That's what we're saying. What else? Again, okay, risk, assumptions, and dependencies. Here we said, we talked about one of the biggest risk is the requirement, writing proper requirement. That's one thing. Not writing proper requirement is a huge risk that I was going over, and also requirement changes changes requirement at a later stage is a high risk, right? Late delivery of application is a risk. So what does that mean? Late delivery of an application. So developers will be working on that application and they need to give it to you for testing once they're done. Now, let's say if developers delay in building that application, and if they're delaying sending that application to you, it's a risk because they're eating up your time. So that's a risk and it happens all the time. Now we need to highlight that to the management that, hey, this developers group, they need to give us the requirement early stage so that we can work on it in a timely manner, right? Okay. So last one, QA environment availability. Sometimes, right, some companies, they don't give you an isolated environment to work in. That's a risk because you need a testing environment where you can do your testing and no one else is touching it. If somebody else has access to your application, there will be if somebody else has access to your application, they can make changes at any time, and you don't want that. And that's a risk. And ideally, you should always have your own environment. You should not work on somebody else's environment. And when I say somebody else's, I'm saying developer's environment or UAT environment. That's not your environment. You should fight for your own environment. And usually the standard, every company would give you your own environment. Now, acronyms, we talked about, like, short forms, like, API. What is API? Application Programming Interface. All of these things you'll be familiar with once you go through the course, but you get the point, right? Like, we talked about UAT before. What is UAT? User acceptance testing. QA, what is QA? Quality assurance. What is development team, right? Things like this. Okay, that's it. Now, sorry for the delay, guys. We're 25 minutes late. I would open the floor for any questions that you may have. I'm gonna stop recording.